morning, everyone, and welcome to the Deusto International Talks Global Series. My name is Ainhoa, and on behalf of Deusto International team, I am glad to introduce you to today's session, Algorithmic Business Thinking. Before we start, we would like to inform you that this talk is being recorded and that you will receive the video shortly. During the session, please feel free to make any questions or comments you may have through the chat box. At the end of the talk, the panelists will reply to all questions posted during the webinar. In this session, we will focus on algorithmic business thinking and how it can help us to better understand the business challenges, break them down so we can work on them, and then reassemble them as opportunities for sustainable organizational growth. We will reflect about this toolkit and a mindset that enable us to bridge computer science to business value and ensure that our teams and companies can operate effectively in the digital economy. And now, with no further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our today's panelist, Professor Paul McDonagh-Smith, Senior Lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management and Digital Capability Leader at MIT Sloan Office of Executive Education. Please, Paul, the floor is yours now. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Ainhoa, for that very kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be with you all today. I'm very pleased, excited even to have the opportunity to be speaking with you, and very pleased to be embarking on the journey together over the next 45 to 55 minutes. So let's get started. So as Ainhoa said, I'm coming to you from MIT. I wear two hats at MIT Sloan. I'm a senior lecturer in the IT group, where I focus on a number of technology intersect points with business, particularly machine learning, augmented reality, virtual reality, and robotics. And I'm also the digital capability leader in the Office of Executive Education, which really means that I focus on three things: responsibility for our digital programs, have the really great opportunity to kind of drive our experimentation with new technologies, playing around with lots of robots and augmented reality, virtual reality, etc. And then also help out with regard to our digital strategy, which, as you can imagine, over the last year in particular, has been quite interesting. So I teach on a number of programs, a number of different types of offerings, largely though related to that intersect point between technology and business. So what are we going to do today? Let's have a little look. There was the late MIT professor and AI pioneer, Patrick Winston. He has an open courseware talk called How to Speak. And I highly recommend, if you want to check it out, it's a great way to spend an hour. I'm sure you'll learn a lot. But one of the things he kind of says at the beginning is that it's very important to make a promise to the people you're speaking with at the beginning of a lecture or the beginning of any type of presentation. He calls it an empowerment promise. And I'm going to try and do the same to you here. I promise you that kind of during the next 45 minutes, we're going to cover the following things. We're going to introduce and define a working concept of algorithmic business thinking. We're going to talk about kind of where we are with technology today and how algorithmic business thinking can help us out individually, in our teams, as well as our companies. We're going to pull back the curtain a little bit, or lift up the hood of our cars and look a little bit at some of the transformative technologies we've got orbiting our companies. And then I'm going to share some key principles with regard to digital language, and firstly explain what I mean by that and kind of what the potential value of it is for all of us in our teams and companies. And please feel free as we go through this, if you have questions, please enter them into the chat box, and we'll leave ample time at the end to answer those questions. And also, a part of my enablement promise here, my empowerment promise as well, is that If there are questions that we don't have time to answer, I'll be happy to provide Ainhoa and Marta, her colleague, with kind of short answers that we can kind of find a way to get to you. Okay, so here goes. Let's get ready, kind of fasten our seatbelts. We're going to go into our introduction to algorithmic business thinking. And I'm going to start by kind of explaining really what led to me coming up with the concept in the first place. There are two kind of main origins or genesis points for this concept. The first is the fact that between kind of my academic career, I started off in academia and kind of course, have returned to it to a degree. But in the middle, I spent almost 20 years in telecoms. And working in telecoms, I worked for a couple of leading organizations. And I had the opportunity to hold a series of senior roles, technical and non-technical. I started off in optical engineering, moved into global services, took a bit of a detour into HR for 3 or 4 years, where I was head of learning in the learning and development department, and then latterly moved back into the technology domains, into R&D incubation, and emerging products and technology. And kind of what I used to see, I had lots of opportunities to sit in rooms with technical and non-technical people. And so sometimes I used to get a little bit disappointed, I suppose, that a lot of the, we were creating great technologies, but a lot of the value seemed to be lost in translation. On one side, we had fantastic technical teams. On the other side, we had fantastic non-technical, whether it be sales, marketing, business function people. And often I thought we were kind of almost building a bridge from two sides of a river and not quite meeting in the middle, if you can see what I mean. And I kind of didn't think that had to be the case. I thought there were ways in which we could work together to create a unified or a united kind of thought process that led to collective intelligence, collective thinking, collective action, and kind of collective momentum forward. And then, that had been a bit of a slow burner in my mind during my kind of industry career. And when I came back into academia 9 years ago, I still had that idea in the back of my mind. And probably about 18 months ago, we had the opportunity at MIT to host a Unicon event. And Unicon, for those of you who aren't aware of it, which is perfectly understandable, by the way, but it's the world's largest consortium of executive education departments. And once a year, they have a major type of conference, which is generally on a shared, or a theme of shared interest and value to the members. And that particular time, we were hosting that conference, that annual conference at MIT, and we decided we would do a 24-hour hackathon type of thing, where we had the input. If you look at my slide here, we had the input on the left-hand side of 100 business school executives, and most of them, if not pretty much all of them, had very limited technical experience. These weren't coders or programmers or people who worked on a daily basis with data. And then as an output, we wanted to kind of give them the capability, but particularly the confidence, to be able to kind of understand and apply key principles of transformative technologies, so they could bring them back into their organizations and work more effectively with technology and technology providers and technology kind of topics in their business school. And so I started to think about some of those ideas I'd had in industry in this type of idea of an input versus an output, and thinking about the process in the middle. And this is really what led to me kind of thinking, perhaps in our organizations, we need something that drives consilience. And this term consilience, meaning unification and unity, was one I borrowed from a professor at Harvard, in fact, E.O. Wilson, who is he's the world's leading expert on ants, of all things, but kind of has a great book on consilience, which I would recommend to you as well. which kind of charts the history of unification of science and the humanities through period of the Enlightenment, and kind of suggesting that today we need something similar. Okay, so that was really a bit of a background to where the idea of algorithmic business thinking was coming from. As I said, the idea that we could take groups of people who didn't have technical kind of prowess, we could put them through a process where we kind of taught key capabilities, and as an output there would be this empowerment, this enablement, and this opportunity to work more effectively and confidently with technologies. And just to kind of move away from a black and white slide, you know, at this Unicorn hackathon, we kind of worked with technologies including virtual worlds, so virtual reality. This is an example of a virtual world that I had built, kind of my team and I, when we were working in telecoms, when I was in those R&D incubation groups. This is me with my Microsoft HoloLens, somewhat embarrassingly outside the Deusto University on a sunny day pre-COVID. You'll notice no masks here, and we used a lot of robotics. I live in London as well as here in Bilbao, and spend a lot of time in Boston, of course, on campus. But in my office, I have robots that I log into to meet with people and kind of do my job. So we were pulling back the curtain on these types of technologies and trying to show how we could embrace their potential, harness their potential in our organizations. And so to bring this back to the idea of algorithmic business thinking itself, the question I hope you're kind of all asking yourselves is, well, Paul has been talking for 10 minutes now, and what on earth is algorithmic business thinking? So algorithmic business thinking fundamentally is a series of insights, models, frameworks that allow us to better understand our business challenges, break them down into smaller, more manageable parts so that we can work on them, and then are able to recombine them, not as challenges, but more as opportunities for sustainable, profitable growth. And the truth of this, the reality is that the concept itself is based on these four cornerstones, okay? Cornerstones of decomposition, pattern recognition, abstraction, and algorithms. And those of you who are coming to this talk from a computer science background will recognize that these four cornerstones are borrowed from computational thinking. I think that these cornerstones can play a vital role in our organizations and in the way that we actually create momentum and create solutions, effective solutions, efficient solutions in the digital economy. So I'm just going to super quickly kind of walk and talk us through the four of these cornerstones. Decomposition, you know, the breaking down of a complex problem into those smaller parts. This is something we do every day, of course, in our organizations. If I think about my time in HR, I could kind of relate decomposition to creating resourcing plans and kind of team plans. I could think about it as creating project plans in the business I do today. I can think about it in terms of the way in which we build our digital programs, the way in which we build our products. You know, we break them down. We break the product design down into more manageable parts, so we can actually undertake tasks in parallel. And then when we're kind of doing that parallelization, then we're able to recombine things and synthesize things together to create solutions. Pattern recognition is a very important thing, and again, something we do every single day of our lives in our organizations. You know, when we're breaking problems down, we're looking to be efficient and effective. We're trying to recognize similarities and patterns within a given problem set, or in fact, kind of an adjacent problem set that we might have worked on before. We might be looking for patterns within our own organization, or ones that work in a similar industry or might be having similar problems, so that we can find solutions and replicate them without having always to begin from scratch, from the beginning. The third cornerstone, abstraction. This is kind of funny because it's almost the opposite of what it might suggest semantically. You know, the word abstraction in some context implies a certain ambiguity or vagueness, when in fact, in computational thinking, in computer science, and in algorithmic business thinking, it's kind of the opposite. It allows us to focus. It allows us to filter out the unnecessary information so we can focus on the key question in front of us. In the world we live in today, I'm sure it's true for all of you as it is for me. You know, we have so much data flying around and so much data spiraling around our organizations. It's very useful to be able to abstract what we need from what we don't need, okay? And I find that the amount of data that we have, if we're not careful, it can almost lead to a form of paralysis in our strategic thinking, in our business planning, the way that we manage as well. So abstraction, the idea of removing the signal from the noise, the wheat from the chaff, is very, very important. The fourth cornerstone, algorithms. Algorithms being a sequence, an ordered set of instructions and activities that allow us to achieve a defined outcome. The important thing here, though, in terms of algorithmic business thinking, is that in today's world, I would argue that in today's business world, in today's digital economy, that we need to think of algorithms not only in a computational context, but very much in a human context as well, or a human and machine partnership context. So the algorithms I think we're going to be creating in our organizations, the sequence of instructions, the set of things that we need to do to achieve an outcome, they're going to be a combination of humans doing certain things and machines doing others. And this is going to require a recalibration, a resetting of the roles of humans and machines, the responsibilities that each take, and the relationships that they're prepared to enter into as well. So that's just a quick introduction to the cornerstones of algorithmic business thinking. Just going to spend a couple of minutes at a very high level, giving you a sense of what algorithmic business thinking actually gives you or gives our teams. So as we've said, we're introducing with algorithmic business thinking an interconnected set of insights, frameworks, models, and I think that's very important at all times. But if I may just relate this to today's context, I want to talk for a moment about recovery and beyond. So I think it's fair to say, without wishing to be melodramatic or kind of at all disrespectful to the very real disruption that's been caused by the pandemic, and on a personal level, forget the professional level for a second, but on a personal level, I hope those of you attending today or listening to this video in the future, I hope that for your families, the pandemic hasn't been overly disruptive, and if it has, that you're able very quickly and very soon to be able to move to a much better place in your personal life and with your families. So just to move for a moment into the professional kind of element of this, I wouldn't suggest that the last 10 months or 12 months have been a lost year as such, but I think it's true that when we get through this period, or when we get back to something kind of resembling a normal, whatever that normal is going to be, we're going to be in a period of recovery. And I've heard a lot of the clients and customers I speak to a lot of the corporations, they've said to me that over the last 10 months, they've probably achieved more in terms of digital transformation than they have in the last 10 years. And I'd like us just to reflect on that kind of observation for a moment, because I think in a lot of our organizations, and kind of speaking on behalf of kind of Ainhoa and Marta as well, I'm sure that the Deusto and universities in general, this is the case, that there's been a lot of digital transformation. And that has an impact. It can be disruptive for our own business models, for our own workforce. But let's think for a moment about our kind of clients and our customers as well. Once we move past all of this, there's going to be a real need for recovery, and to think about how do we actually provide the thinking, the toolkit, the mindset to allow organizations to progress and to be effective as they've moved more and further into the digital domain. And I think this is where algorithmic business thinking, okay, in the short term is going to be useful. In the more medium to longer term, I think it offers broader value. But I'd like you to kind of just think about how we are going to address our organizational requirements and those of our kind of clients and our networks as we move forward. And as I've said before, I think algorithmic business thinking offers this opportunity for unity and unification, for Consilience. As I mentioned, Professor E.O. Wilson, he kind of references it in this idea in the context of Consilience of the sciences and humanities. I suppose I'm positioning this in the context of humans and machines. And the final thing I wanted to share with you here, with regard to what ABT, algorithmic business thinking, gives, is in the form of a formula. And you have to excuse me, I suppose. It's kind of a natural thing at MIT that we kind of talk about formulas as well. So this is borrowed actually from Patrick Winston, Professor Winston, that I referenced earlier around the enablement promise. And when he introduces this formula, he does it in the context of effective communication. I'm introducing it here in the context of effective algorithmic business thinking, or performance, high-level digital performance in the digital economy. And what I'm saying with this formula is that efficiency of how we operate in the digital economy is a function of these three variables. The K here stands for knowledge, P stands for practice, and T stands for talent. Okay. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that the knowledge and the practice are capitalized, and the T is pretty small. And what I mean to suggest by this is that even if you are not a computer scientist, even if you are not a data scientist, even if you are coming to this topic of algorithmic business thinking, or in fact the digital economy from a non-technical kind of background, do not worry about this, because I truly believe, based on what I've seen in my personal experience, my professional experience, but also that of a number of corporations I work with, that if you focus on gaining the right knowledge and critically you practice using that knowledge, then the point around inherent talent is, okay, it's important, but it's not as important as the other two variables, okay? So I will never have, to be honest with you, I will never have the talents of kind of good or very good kind of computer scientists. But I know, because I've seen it, that if I focus on improving my knowledge and I practice using it and I learn how to apply and create, capture, deliver value, then I can live with not being the most talented person in the world, okay? Now, where are we with technology? I'm just going to spend a little bit of time just to kind of take a little bit of a step back and try and give you a sense of where we are today and how we got here, because I think that will set some important context for how we think about this concept of algorithmic business thinking, and more broadly, how you all think about the challenges and the conversion of those challenges into opportunities in the digital economy. And the way I'm going to do this is by combining molecularly, I'm going to combine two concepts. The first one, probably better known, is Moore's law. And this comes from an article that I believe was published in the 1965, perhaps, in Electronics magazine by Gordon Moore, where he kind of stated his kind of hypothesis that the number of transistors and resistors on a chip would double every 18 to 24 months moving into the future. When this hypothesis actually proved to be true, this theory kind of came into practice. And the idea of Moore's law, which I'm sure a number of you will be very familiar with, it's kind of it's grown a life of its own to a degree, where it's not just applicable and relevant to transistors and chip design, but also in a number of other areas, disk capacity, lots of networking kind of areas. Now, what I'd like to do is combine that idea of Moore's law, this idea of constant doubling, with a story about the invention of the game of chess. And I'll give you a very shortened version of this story, just to kind of prove the point, or just to make the point. So the story I'm telling you was shared with me by a colleague, Professor Erik Brynjolfsson, now at Stanford, but kind of had a very good and very important, very significant, impactful career at MIT, and of course still very much part of our community. And he told me this story about the invention of the game of chess, where the inventor goes along to the emperor of his country, I think in India, and kind of explains kind of that he's got this new game, and kind of explains how it works and everything else. And the emperor of the country is kind of completely amazed by how fantastic this game is, and says to the inventor, basically, pick your reward. Now, the inventor is quite a clever man, and kind of says, well, in his reply to the emperor, he says, I'm a very humble person. All I ask for is kind of grains of rice in the following order. I would like 1 grain on the first board, the first space of the chessboard, and then 2 on the second, and to be doubled, the grains of rice to be doubled on each subsequent kind of square of the board. And so we have this situation where we move from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16. You kind of see where I'm going with this, of course. And this isn't a problem in the early kind of squares of the chessboard, okay? However, by the time we move into the second, or we get to the end of the first half, the numbers have arrived at kind of 4 billion type of, it gets very high, the numbers, because of this idea of constant doubling and the exponential kind of growth idea. And by the time we get to the end of that first half of the chessboard, the inventor has the equivalent of a large paddy field of rice, for 4 billion grains. And the emperor is kind of starting to take notice of what might be going on here. And of course, this is a bit of a precarious position for the inventor, and in fact for the emperor, in terms of, you know, maintaining his control and his power. And really, what I'm suggesting is that growth and Moore's law, at first, it can appear, the advances can appear to be quite linear, and we can handle those kind of intellectually and in terms of our mental capacities. But this concept of exponential growth pretty soon kind of gets pretty incredible, and can lead us to incredible places. Now, Professor Erik Brynjolfsson, Erik also kind of explained to me that he did this back of an envelope type of calculation, where he looked back in kind of the US statistics, National Bureau of Statistics, to see when was the first year that the term information technology was actually included as an area for investment. And it turns out that it was actually 1958. And so if you kind of take 1958 as a starting point, and you apply Moore's law and this concept of the technology chessboard, it kind of suggests that by the time we got to 2005, 2006, we were in the second half of our technology chessboard. And this might, to some degree, explain the almost science fiction-like technologies that we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years. You know, the era of the smartphone, of the progression of driverless cars, of poker, chess, deep mind, lots of incredible technologies and products and kind of services as we get into this second half of the technology chessboard. What it also suggests from a concept of exponential growth is that, wow, as we move forward over the next months and years, we can expect incredible kind of growth and expansion. And the expansion in technology and developments that we're going to see aren't going to be every now and then. They're going to come thick and fast. And this is why, I suppose, I'm suggesting that it's going to be so important that we change our way of thinking and our way of acting in our businesses and in society, in fact, around technology and how we can harness and work with it. And building on this combination of Moore's law with the kind of idea of exponential growth, just want to say a couple of things around the transition that we've seen from agrarian to industrial to digital kind of networks. Networks exist everywhere, of course, whether it's kind of in nature or in our kind of organizations. And just to kind of put this into context a tiny bit, if I were to think, and I'd ask you to do the same, think a little bit about kind of our parents, grandparents, perhaps even great-grandparents. In the agrarian kind of types of societies, our worlds kind of generally existed within a parameter or a radius of maybe 10 or 15 kilometers. You know, our homes, our place of work, our place of worship, our friends, our connections. It was all pretty tight within fixed kind of geographical areas. Then, with the Industrial Revolution and the gravitational pull of cities, we found people being pulled kind of towards the cities, often entire families, and in fact, not always within the same country, but also into other countries. My parents are Irish, and that's kind of what happened, you know, with kind of my family moving, or my parents moving from Ireland to England, was, you know, the gravitational pull of work, the opportunity to kind of economically to kind of move forward, etc. Now, as we are in the digital economy, this there is a transition, of course. It reminds me of the Henry Ford kind of line that you can have a Model T in any color as long as it's black. You know, that's kind of seems incredible to us, doesn't it, today in a world where we've moved from mass production to mass personalization. We're moving from mass communication, hopefully, to mass collaboration. You know, we are the media. We're our own media. We spread our lives across kind of physical and digital networks. Electricity is imbued with emotion. It kind of crackles at times in terms of the possibilities of human connections. And given all of those possibilities and all of those variables, I think we very much live in a time of wonder and a time of opportunity. Challenges, yes, without doubt. But I'd like us all to kind of keep a positive view of what we can do. And again, referring it back to algorithmic business thinking, the frameworks, the insights, the models are very much meant to convert that optimism and that possibility into a reality. Okay, at MIT, our motto is mens et manus, literally mind and hand. So respectfully, I think it's great to have research insights and to have kind of, you know, frameworks and what have you, but we have to use them, and we have to have a tool. We have to have a toolkit, and we have to have a mindset, and we have to have a common approach. Otherwise, we won't be able to use and convert this research and these ideas into practical outcomes in our organizations very effectively. So this brings me on just to talk, this might be very familiar to you. This borrowed from the London Underground. As you can see, I borrow from lots of different sources. And I think there are kind of important gaps that we need to mind as we transition further from the industrial economy society into the digital one, okay? And the kind of gaps that I'm talking about are with regard to building bridges such that our workforce but also our way of thinking about strategy, leadership, management, so that our workforce, our customers, our clients, our way of doing business can effectively evolve into the digital economy, to create that sustainability that's important, but also to create that productivity and profitability, which, you know, it's the bottom line of the way that our organizations work. And another point that I think is relevant, and I'd like you to keep in mind, is that, you know, today we have a periodic table of transformative technologies, of different technology families, whether that be, you know, the AI family of machine learning and natural language processing, machine learning, lots of different technology stacks, whether it be cyber, whether it be augmented, you know, realities, augmented, virtual, extended realities, whether it be, you know, 3, 4, 5G, etc. There are lots of different families, and we have lots of potential in these technologies. But we have to create the user experiences and the products and the designs that actually take advantage of the technology capability that we have at our disposal. We can't simply take the UXs and the user experience or the learner experiences that went into the last generation of products and technologies and expect to use them effectively in the ones that we've got at our disposal today and the ones that are coming around the corner tomorrow. We need to think, we need creativity and curiosity, etc., to drive the right type of user experiences. And I think this kind of reskilling and rethinking is provided by algorithmic business thinking. Now, I have to admit as well, as I've spoken more to corporations with regard to this idea of minding the gap, I've kind of realized that perhaps I was missing the point a little bit, or that there's another thing that needs to be said here, which is, as we're crossing this bridge, we need to kind of look at what's beneath our feet as well. And this has got a lot to do, I think, with the recovery I mentioned from the COVID and kind of pandemic situation that we're in. Beneath our feet, we've probably got some incredible opportunities for innovation just waiting to be exploited, whether it's business models, whether it's kind of new products, new services, new ways of doing things. We might already, you know, there's always a tendency to kind of think about what's coming next. What can I do next? What's the next thing? But we may have some things kind of in the gap that we can actually exploit and use today. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the ways in which we kind of use algorithmic business thinking, and I don't mean to kind of give anybody a little bit of a fright here, but I just wanted to talk about something I call the 3:30 syndrome. You know, when you wake up, kind of you wake up in the middle of the night, kind of thinking about your business problems or business realities, and kind of find it difficult to get back to sleep. It's almost as if you know the story of Scrooge, where the ghosts of kind of Christmas past or present or even future could come to visit you and kind of, you know, wake you up, and you find yourself kind of somewhat illogically at times trying to kind of get back to sleep and kind of put some of these kind of problems to bed to stop thinking about them. And I think algorithmic business thinking is really important, particularly decomposition and pattern recognition to actually kind of do that. And this is just a quick framework here that I think allows us, particularly from an IT perspective, to understand some of the trade-offs, okay, that we have in our decision making. So when I wake up at 3:30 in the morning, which is unfortunately quite regularly, thinking about business problems, I try to kind of take a step back from them. I try to break them down into more manageable parts. I think about the various objectives. I think about what options I've got at my kind of disposal. I think around the different dimensions, you know, kind of cost, resourcing, these types of things. I try to analyze a little bit the kind of what's behind these problems. And I try to come up with a very high level proposal that would allow me to kind of address these problems. And so what I'm trying to suggest here is that when you do wake up, and I hope it doesn't happen often to you, of course, but when you do wake up at 3:30 in the morning, applying some of the principles of algorithmic business thinking just kind of breaking the problem down a little bit to find the first problem you can resolve, reducing the problems into smaller bits, finding that first thing you can fix, then using that as a domino effect to move on to the next things and build confidence can be a very useful kind of tool. There are lots of examples I could share of algorithmic business thinking in action. I'm just going to focus on one here that was kind of conducted by a colleague of mine at MIT, Professor Danielle Lee, who kind of works on the design of algorithms in organizations. And Danielle and her team kind of worked on a project, kind of research on hiring as exploration. And fundamentally what Danielle was doing and her team was kind of moving away from the idea of using supervised machine learning algorithms and models in recruitment to kind of come up with more exploration-based models. And you can kind of Google the research papers are kind of publicly available. Danielle Lee, L-I is the surname, and you can kind of see the details of all of this. But what I wanted to focus upon just very briefly were the results and the outcomes of kind of taking almost an algorithmic business thinking approach to the problem of recruitment. And so what Danielle found was that under this exploration-based algorithm, 25% of candidates that were actually selected for interview ended up being hired, and that was kind of a move to 25% from 10% under the supervised machine learning algorithms. And then when it came to diversity and kind of top talent, what Danielle and the team actually found was that under the supervised learning models, only 2% of the applicants who passed initial resume screening were Black, and less than 5% were Hispanic. Under Danielle's algorithms, those shares kind of rose to 14% and 10% respectively. So this idea of kind of taking an exploratory approach, breaking the problem down into its constituent parts and looking for patterns and using algorithms in new and interesting ways kind of proved to be very effective. Now, I'm just going to take a few minutes just to kind of introduce the idea of digital language to you. And I think this is particularly interesting in our organizations. And let me try and explain why I think it's so interesting. And I'm kind of embarrassed and kind of shocked and disappointed that it took me so long to actually kind of realize the importance of speaking. You know, the 20 years I spent in telecoms, and of course the kind of almost 10 years I've been at MIT now, I've spent literally years kind of working on writing and reading technology, whether it's kind of coding, programming, network management systems, you know, all of that type of stuff. And it took me a while to kind of realize how important it was speaking technology as well, because it's one thing to read and write, but the point at which you start actually speaking a digital language, it kind of hits the oxygen of our kind of human capabilities, creativity, curiosity, compassion, all of these human-centric characteristics that kind of allow for a dialogue and an evolution of the possibilities and innovation with kind of technology that I think is incredible. And so what I'm suggesting here at a high level is that in order to remove the siloing and the functional kind of vertical approaches in our organizations, we will be aided by getting more fluent in a digital language. And I'm not talking only about vocabulary, syntax and grammar. I'm talking about really speaking. And so it's funny, isn't it, when you think about, if we all think just for a moment about our own experiences of kind of learning languages, you know, I remember whether it's kind of learning German, Italian, Spanish, French is always a good one for this as well, because I remember kind of sitting down with verb books, you know, 501 Spanish verbs, 501 French, you know, that type of thing, and going through the conjugation, drinking a cup of tea and feeling all very comfortable about the whole thing. The problem, of course, with languages is that at a certain point, you have to start speaking it. Reading and writing it, I would suggest, is kind of a lot easier than the speaking part. And that's for a couple of reasons, isn't it? One, you have to make a leap. You have to kind of be prepared to make mistakes, kind of somewhat embarrassing, and it can be difficult. And that's why I said French is kind of a good one, because I could fill kind of at least 10 of these types of webinars just with my embarrassing moments in different languages. But French kind of has lots of them. I remember sitting in coffee shops, a coffee bar kind of in Paris, kind of with all of my kind of sentences practiced and lined up, and the waiter not understanding a single word of what I was saying. But you have to keep going. I suppose that's my point. Not around embarrassment, but the fact that you, with any language, you have to keep moving forward. And ultimately, what I'd like us to become, and what algorithmic business thinking supports, I believe, is that we can become translators in our organizations. Translators, converting the value of computer science into business science or business value. But not only that, also kind of the other way, being able to articulate business needs and business requirements in a common digital language, such that technical experts, the computer scientists, the people providing us with the technologies, understand really what we need and what we want, so that we're actually building that bridge that meets in the middle. Okay. So just something for you to think about as you move forward in your organizations or in your teams, the need to actually embrace digital language and speak it and kind of take that leap forward. Now, just conscious of time, I'm just very briefly going to introduce what I call a 3E model. So all of these ideas of algorithmic business thinking that I've kind of at a high level kind of referred to, whether it's, I have a number of models, a double helix of humans and machines working together, a periodic table of kind of digital elements kind of grouped based on their kind of their shared characteristics, how molecularly we kind of combine them. I have kind of theories and models around kind of the genetics, genome and genes of algorithmic business thinking. But what I want to leave you with is this idea that none of this gets converted to reality unless you're prepared to explore, experiment, and evolve your organizations. So I believe you'll be given these slides, so I'm not going to go through all of these points. I'm very fortunate that kind of I have relationships. I've done some work with NASA, and the chap, the guy that I've most recently kind of spoken with at NASA, their chief scientist, has this concept of a forever frontier. And what he means by this when he talks about it from a NASA perspective is that, okay, it's great that we talk about, returning to the moon and kind of colonization of Mars and robotics kind of visits to Venus and what have you. But we also have to understand that we are part of space as well. This is part, we live on a planet in space. We are part of it. And we all work in organizations that are part of a digital society and a digital universe as well. And I think the time is well past when we can kind of legitimately kind of refute that point. We live in a digital universe. We are part of it. And the more that we get to know about it and the more that we understand it, the better for our organizations. We need to drive, we need to inspire people. We need to drive innovation, interconnections. We need to be focused on discoveries, on making things, on doing things. To do that, we need to experiment continuously, not as kind of as a hobby, but as kind of a complete approach to our work and our practices. We need to be positive every single morning. If you're doing your job correctly, and if I'm doing my job correctly, I wake up every morning with 20 problems I have to solve, with 20 kind of 20 issues. That needs positive leadership. We need to recognize that every single problem that comes in is an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for evolution and development. And my final point on this slide is around being human. I truly believe, somewhat paradoxically maybe, that the successful digital organizations of the future are going to be built on human-centric capabilities, okay? A key one of those is compassion. You have to care. We have to care about our employees. We have to care about our customers. And if we care more about them than our competitors, trust me, I think we'll do better and we'll be more successful. Now, evolution, as I mentioned kind of just a moment ago, led by human-centric capabilities and characteristics. I'm only going to focus on the final one, consilience, the idea of unity, of unification, of kind of pulling together. I think that's important. It's important in our organizations. It's important in our organizations, whether they be our families, whether they be our, if you're religious, in your churches, in your communities, in your societies, and our teams and our organizations. We have more in common than we have different. Yeah. So I think this idea of consilience and unification is important. So these are just some of the things that we've covered. We've talked a little bit about algorithmic business thinking, where we are with technology, transition from industrial networks to digital networks. I've spoken about my 330 syndrome, my problem, referenced Danielle Lee's work, talked a tiny bit about digital language. In fact, just a final thing about digital language that I'd like you to keep in mind. My inspiration there is actually from the MIT professor emeritus, Noam Chomsky, an incredible voice and leader in the field of linguistics, who kind of makes the point that the primary function of language isn't actually to communicate, but to link interfaces. And as you interface more with machines and technology, I think we need to find that digital language that makes all of that possible. And I've super briefly just shared with you this concept of a 3E approach, okay? There we are, a picture from NASA, just to kind of hopefully inspire us a little bit. So what I'm going to do now, belatedly, is pass it back to Ainhoa and to the team and see if there are any questions that you have for me.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Paul, for this interesting opportunity and for sharing your knowledge and your expertise on this topic. I think we have a question now from Anna Borodina. She asks, does ABT approach have anything in common with the so-called theory of inventive problem solving, or are these totally different things?
No, they coexist. And what I would like to say about this is that, you know, also from an MIT perspective, and I'm sure from the Deusto and lots of organizations as well, we have our frameworks and our models, systems thinking, dynamics thinking, Six Sigma. We have lots of problem-solving, decision-making methodologies, don't we, and techniques. Algorithmic business thinking is simply meant to be complementary, not competitive to any of these. It's simply meant to kind of allow those four cornerstones, the decomposition, pattern recognition, abstraction, and algorithms, to practically support everything else that we're doing. It's not meant to be a silver bullet, a single solution, just something. If I may, I'll share one last analogy. Marvin Minsky, the MIT professor and AI pioneer, he kind of talks about suitcase terms. Suitcase kind of terms are words that escape easy definition because they have a lot packed into them. Algorithmic business thinking is a suitcase, okay? Or I'd like you to visualize, it's a suitcase in which you can kind of carry along a toolkit. And when you need it, when you have problems, when you have certain situations, you can pick the right tool out of that suitcase or that toolkit. Nothing more than that. Not meant to be competitive to anything else.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Paul. Very clear answer then. So I think there are no more questions now. So all we get to do now is to thank you again and to thank all participants for their interest and their questions as well. And just to be reminded that we mentioned before, you will receive the sessions video within the next days, and you will also be informed on the incoming Deusto's international talks. So everybody stay safe, stay well. Thank you so much and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.